All right, so it appears today's class is just going to be composed of 2 people, which is fine, don't mind. I am going to share my screen. I'm assuming you can hear me. This is what the visuals seem to suggest. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen and then.
Yes, I can.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for confirming. And then we can start. So as I'm setting up here and sharing my screen and whatnot, I just wanted to find out if you people have questions that might be related to the things that we looked at yesterday, especially when we started our discussion of so-called use cases, and in particular use case diagrams. Right? Turns out that those are extremely important artifacts that will eventually have to find themselves in the SRS document that you need to revise. I don't know if there are any questions. Okay, no questions. Then if there are no questions, we continue our discussion from where we left off. And today, I was making changes to the slides, right? And I sat down and I was thinking how best to present, or how best to have a discussion around so-called use case descriptions, right? And in particular, what I would like for us to focus our attention on is the tabular representation, so the tabular notation. We've introduced this tabular notation a while back, I think in lecture series number 6 or something. So anyway, I hope the approach I'm going to take is going to be okay. I guess it's going to help people gain a sense of what these use case descriptions are all about. But nonetheless, I'll context switch between the slides, and at some stage maybe I'll walk through this document here, right? The document that is associated with not this, but I guess this document here. Just quickly get to it. I hope it's there. It should be there, though maybe not. Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to context switch between, and it's not really the entire document. I'm just going to context switch between the slides, and then at some stage, I will switch to this example use case, right? Maybe I should just export this into PDF to make life bearable. Anyway, so this is working, but maybe not. All right, just give me a second. Let me just just open this up. So I'm going to context switch between that and this part of the document, right? And I do encourage you, as you're working through this template, is available on Moodle. So as you're modifying the SRS document, your respective SRS document, I would like to insist that you actually make use of the template that's in this document, right? The document is named, I think it's use case template or something. You should be able to find it there on Moodle, right? All right, so I'm going to context switch between this. All right, so on with it. Pause. Okay, so we discussed use cases, and then we ended up at the point where we got to a stage where we understand exactly what sort of aspects or elements compose a use case diagram, right? So we understand what that is all about, and then we also went through Lucy chart to get an appreciation of how we can take advantage of Lucy chart to actually come up with these use case diagrams. Very easy to do, especially if you take the approach where you latch onto a pre-existing templates. And I do encourage you to start with templates. So finally, to wrap up this discussion of use cases, we're just going to briefly walk through so-called use case descriptions. Remember that we mentioned at some stage that this sort of document, this sort of diagram here, or this particular diagram, use case diagram, conveys a certain type of message. And in fact, if you look at the message from the perspective of the relative level of abstraction associated with the system you're building, you are really abstracting the core features of the system, essentially spelling out the actions that users, the different system users, are going to have to perform to achieve a certain desired goal, right? But the question is, what sort of additional information can you provide to the people that are going to have to translate these sort of artifacts into actual source code for them to be able to be effective at what they do? Or it turns out that you complement these diagrams with so-called use case descriptions, right? And a classic example of how your average use case description would look like is something that you hopefully are seeing right now on the screen, right? It will have details of the specific use case that the description is associated with, the individual that created the use case, when the use case was created, when last it was updated, and by whom it was updated. Now, the top part here is just nothing more than meta information, right? Meta information to help provide contextual overview about the use case itself. Remember that what you're seeing on the screen right now is meant to represent all the use cases associated with your system. So for instance, if you're building a system and if your group has narrowed down to, let's say, a set of these core use cases here that you can see on the screen, 6 of them, what we're saying is that each of these 6 use cases must have a corresponding use case description, right? So you'd have a total of 6 use case descriptions, each of them represented, like if you're using a tabular notation, each of them represented like so, right? With details of who created that use case, when it was created, if at all there were modifications that were made, who did the modifications and when the modifications were done, right? And the reason for doing this is simple. You want to be able to easily follow up in case there's an issue that arises, in case you need clarification. Extremely useful when you are working on a relatively large project where you perhaps have thousands of people that are part of the project team, hundreds of developers, right? Now, in terms of the ID itself, I mean, you can come up with your own way of uniquely identifying use cases. What I've done here in this particular example, you notice is that, sorry, the birds pitching outside. Let me just close the windows. I'm so sorry. I do apologize for that. Yeah, confusion, right? Today it's the birds. Before you know it, there's a pool party or something. Life can be cruel sometimes. All right, so it's what we're saying. So I'll talk about the convention that I'm using myself. The UC just stands for use case, and the reason I prefix all these IDs with UC is when coming up with different other artifacts, let's say sequence diagrams, this would be SQ, for instance, right? So the first character is just, for me, right? This is my own naming convention. The first 2 characters just signal the type of document or the type of artifact that I'm creating, right? The model that I'm working with. And then the next part here for me is nothing more than just the short name for the, the abbreviation for the system being developed, right? So this is a simple IR deposit system, right? And then the last bit is just an auto-incremental number, right? That numerically identifies all the different artifacts that I'm creating. So if I create another use case diagram, it would be UCSIRD hyphen 002, right? And then the next one will be 003. So I'll have a total of, if I was to map the use case descriptions to this use case diagram, I'll have 001, 002, 003, 004, 005, 006, right? So it's nothing more than just a way of uniquely identifying this. Now, the reason, right, one of the other reasons why you want to uniquely identify use cases is because in your SRS document, there are certain portions in the SRS document where you're going to have to make reference to certain artifacts. And it turns out that it's a lot easier for you to make reference to use cases by ID. So perhaps you find yourself stage where you are creating, just for argument's sake, a sequence diagram, and you want to refer to a use case that is associated with that sequence diagram. All you do is you provide this cross-reference, right? Let's say this is associated with use case ID UCSIRD001. Right? It becomes a lot easier. And of course, you have the name, right? The name is nothing more than a direct mapping from this diagram here. So just these names that you give your use cases, right? The names that signal the action that is going to be performed by the user. The user is going to create an account, synchronize the objects, ingest digital objects. The user is going to log in, create metadata, upload a bitstream or something. Very easy stuff. I mean, the other stuff here is pretty much self-explanatory. You just want to make sure that you provide comprehensive details here, right? Don't use abbreviations or something like JM, right? Say, you know that JM is Jackson Mwanaumu, but you want to be explicit. In fact, Lighton made a mistake here because what I should have done, scratch that. What I should have done is not what you can see there. What I should have done is this, right? This is the right thing to do. You understand this? And maybe I guess I just stretch it a little bit to the right? This is much better, right? Why? It's very easy to follow. Surprise. Yeah, I guess it doesn't matter if this thing is it's just a bit. Anyway, right? So created by, and then the date when it was created and whatnot, right? And then comes this next part here, and this is where I was saying I'm going to context switch here to just try and explain these different things here. I thought including the visuals here was going to be a bit cumbersome, so I'm going to context switch to the actual use case description that I came up with, and just walk you through these different things here. And I would like you to pay particular attention to actually the corresponding values associated with these items, right? And in particular, the second column, right? So this part here, because this is the most important thing anyway. All right, so what we're saying here is that the first part, obviously, you need to, this is in relation to the template we've adopted, but really, if you come across different templates, you find that those different templates will pretty much have similar things we have here, right? Perhaps organized in a different way, but the idea is the same. If you remember, the example that I like, the actual real life, not the actual, but a real life example that I latched onto a while back was what we called the, I don't know if people remember this, but if I go to projects.uct.ac.za, if you remember, I've been showcasing, there's a particular document, and I don't know if I uploaded this. If I didn't, remind me, and then I'll re-upload this. I think it should be on Moodle, but I find it a lot easier to actually find it like so. If you remember, there was a time, there's a project that I keep on referring to here, right? Because it turns out it was a software engineering project, and it helps, this project right here. It helps put certain things into perspective. What I'm doing here, by the way, is I'm just trying to showcase to you that the way that you get to present information might not be exactly the same as what Lighton is showcasing right now, right? And I want to show you a completely different format here, hopefully. Oh, wow, use cases, beautiful, it's here. Right, so this is what I was talking about. If you look at this format that these people that implemented the project RIMS platform, you notice that the way these things are formatted is differently, right? I mean, they probably use a different template. I'm not sure where they got this template from, but the idea is the same, right? You have the name of the use case, you have the description, you have primary actors and secondary actors, you have preconditions, you have the main flow. Of course, what these guys did is they omitted the alternative flow, right? Sometimes you tend to cut corners, especially depending on who is meant to be a beneficiary of what you're doing, right? Then you have preconditions. These guys clearly don't have post conditions. Oh, post conditions and preconditions are here. Oh, they have the alternative flow. Beautiful. It's just that it comes way after the post conditions. Ideally, the alternative flow is supposed to come after the main flow, right? But that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say here is that if you look at the way this is formatted, it's completely different from this, right? You notice this thing doesn't have meta information on top here. It only has details that are specific to this particular use case. Nothing like use case ID 1 or something, right? Just a name description. Right? Doesn't matter though, you give this to a program and the program will be able to translate this into code, right? This is what you want, this is the goal. Here's the thing, the first part here is the actor detail, the actors portion here is nothing more than, it spells out which actors are going to make use of this particular use case. And knowing which actors are associated with this use case is quite easy. It's easy because you already have use case diagram. A use case diagram that tells you, yeah? Tells you what each one of these different users, what each one, which use cases each of these different users is associated with. So if you look at this particular use case here, ingest digital object, and you look at this use case diagram, you will notice that the ingest digital object, come on, why? The ingest digital object is only associated with a student, right? Postgraduate student. Observe, there's nothing like library staff is not involved. Administrator, if we had an administrator, he would not be involved. But if we are working with let's say the create account use case, what we would have had here is would have had all the actors that are associated with that particular use case. Is this making sense? So actors, you just list the roles, right? The actual actors that are associated with the use case. Roles associated with, or actors associated with this use case here. And then the description just describes, provides a comprehensive description of the use case itself, right? How the use case is used. So if you look at this particular example here, the ingest digital object, you're just saying that a postgraduate student accesses the SIRD system using a browser, logs into the system and selects an option to enable them to deposit a digital object. So I'm just explaining at a very high level what the use case is for, what this particular feature is for. Is this making sense? These are people that don't listen, right? And there are a lot of you guys. How are you going to function in society? Ivy, we're in the Ivy League now, I suppose. Ivy, Alice, Aaron, or characters that don't want to learn, right? Anyway, so the trigger is going to indicate an event that's going to necessitate the use of this particular use case, right? So in this case, what we're saying is we're saying that the trigger is going to be a postgraduate student hopefully once logged on, indicating that they want to submit a revised version of their thesis or manuscript or something, right? So it's a precursor, it's an event that leads up to an actor making use of this particular use case. What triggers that, right? That event itself, so that's a trigger. And then the preconditions would be a series of conditions that need to be true before the use case can actually be utilized, right? Or before the initiation actually takes place. And you notice that in this case, we're saying that for this postgraduate student to be able to ingest digital objects, the student must have a valid account because they need to log in for them to be able to use the system, right? And they must be logged onto the system. So if this actor does not have a valid account or has not logged onto the system, they will not be able to make use of this use case. Think about this for a second, right? This tells you a lot of different things here. It's telling you to say part of your implementation is going to have some sort of mechanism in place to check if the user is logged on before they are allowed to ingest a digital object. You need to have a mechanism in place to check if a user has created an account. If they have a valid account, of course, I mean, this is a 1 and 2 are more or less like related as well, right? For you to be able to log in, you need a valid account. Is this making sense? So a precondition is just a set of rules that need to hold true before a use case can actually be utilized. Yeah, and then your post conditions would be rules or things that need things that will be a direct result of making use or interacting with that particular use case. So if this postgraduate user successively ingests a digital object, what we're saying is that the end result, which is the post condition, will be such that the manuscript, which is the PDF document itself, will be uploaded successfully. What else? We are saying that the descriptive information associated with the manuscripts, aka the metadata, in this case, it's going to be inserted into the database, right? This is what we expect to happen once the interaction with this use case is successful. And so if we were to latch on to, I guess, an easy to understand, perhaps use case description, let's say we, okay, observe, right? Let's say, okay, let's say we have a use case, which I'm using simple. Use case name is login, right? Login to system or something. What we're saying with precondition, a precondition here would be for you to even log into this, and this is a no-brainer here, right? Post condition. For you to log into a system, you log in using credentials, right? A username and password usually. Depends. Sometimes you log in using your phone or something. And one, you log in using your maybe your phone number or something. Sometimes using your email address or something. When you go to your ATM machine, right? Implicitly, you use your card or something. There's obviously a unique way of identifying who you are there, and then you type in your PIN code, right? But that's neither here nor there. What we're saying is that if let's say we had a use case called login to system, which we have, by the way, in here. I don't know if you remember this, but we have the login system, login use case here. What we're saying is for you, before the precondition would be user must have a valid account. You can't log in without a valid account. User must have a valid password, right? And I guess it'd probably be more or something, I don't know. And then the post condition, we're saying once you successfully log in, what do we expect to happen? How do we expect the system to behave? Right. The obvious logical thing here is that we say the post condition is user is presented with dashboard. It's like I guess the easiest way of finding out this thing here is, let's say we go to Facebook, right? And later we're probably going to log out here. If you go to Facebook, right? I'll log out here. Let's say it's a login for Facebook. You notice that when I successfully log in, right? I log in. I guess I'm going to successfully log in now, right? Because I saved my password. I successfully log in. What am I presented with? A dashboard, right? Or a landing page or something. It doesn't matter what you call it. But so this is a, don't know who died here. No, so this is just an example of what happens after the interaction with the use case is successful, right? So you're presented with a dashboard or maybe a landing page or something. Is this making sense? This idea of post condition.
On the issue of the valid account and also indicating the password.
Yes.
Is there a difference?
Sorry?
What do you mean by valid account? Okay, like in terms of the valid account.
So
that means someone must create an account first, isn't it? They must be registered first, like they create an account.
Yeah, I mean, so you could view that. Well, a valid account here could be implicitly viewed as you having registered successfully, right? So a valid account depends on the type of system. So for Facebook, your valid account is either phone number, right? Phone number or email address. So what we're saying here is you must, I guess, one way of looking at this is you must have a valid account, or you must have a valid registered account or something. I don't know. It's or you must have, or what you can do is you can just as well, I guess, carve it out the way you just said. You must have created an account.
Yeah,
So,
that sounds
valid,
right.
yeah. But the thing is, you have to look at valid account from so many different perspectives. Sometimes maybe your account could have been, I guess, disabled or something. Or, I don't know. But it doesn't matter anyway. But how you choose to phrase this is up to you, I guess. But if this was a bit confusing, then it's a bit of an issue. Anyways, it was just one of those rough examples. But it would be an issue because remember that this thing could potentially be given out to a programmer that knows nothing about how this thing was being arrived at. As far as they're concerned, what you're giving them is this thing here. And then they'll be able to translate this into fully functional code, right? To write a program based on this sort of input, or at least in part based on this input. So yeah, I mean, the phrasing, I mean, something that you want to pay particular attention to, and the way that you probably be able to get good at this is by reading other people's use case descriptions. And in fact, this applies to all the different things that we've been looking at, right? If you want to make sure that you're doing the right things when it comes to context diagrams, the sequence diagrams, if you want to really truly understand what's going on, just Google up examples of use case diagrams or use case descriptions, right? So that you see, and the easiest way of doing this, I guess I'm gonna have to say this again, easiest way of doing this is think of maybe an open source system that you use, and I like using Moodle, right? Open source software will almost always have these artifacts that we're discussing. Why? Because you have hundreds of developers that are contributing code here. If you develop an interest to contribute source code, let's say to Moodle, right? Because you see it as being a noble cause, right? Dedicating your time for free, no compensation here. Of course, there are benefits. We discuss these benefits. The first place you're going to do is you're going to have to understand exactly how Moodle works. How do you understand how Moodle works? You look up the design documents, you look up the requirement specification documents if they exist, you look up things like sequence diagrams. So if you Google up Moodle software use case diagrams, for instance, I'm pretty sure you should be able to, oh my God, let's be creative. If you look up, if we just filter out Moodle.org, so to just get the desirable content here, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to come across class diagrams, sequence diagrams of this, of the Moodle software. Why? If you're new, like I said, I mean, if you're new, this is course ordering, I don't know what this is. But let's try and look for something else. Maybe DSpace, use case diagram. I would be surprised if DSpace doesn't have this, right? You should be able to find these things somewhere. So in most instances, by the way, a nice way of finding these artifacts is by going to the source code repository. So for instance, if you say Git, why am I doing this? You can just go here. If I say I'm going to go to GitHub, pause for a little while. If I'm going to go to GitHub and let's say I want to search for, I want to go to DSpace and hopefully I'll be able to find the document, the developer documentation somewhere. Hopefully, I hope there's a wiki page here. Not this thing. Developer. Very sad. Anyway, if you poke around here, I mean, if you poke around this thing, you'll be able to find these artifacts that I'm talking about, right? You should be able to find these artifacts that I'm talking about. But so it helps really if you, I guess what I'm trying to say here is if you really want to truly understand what goes on as you're doing some of these things we're going to walk through, because we're just glossing over most of these things, you want to look at real life examples of software, artifacts that have been created, and they are available on the internet, right? There's countless systems that are open source out there, and almost all of them will have corresponding maybe requirement specification documents and all those things. I know a while back I was following through, maybe I should use this as an example. A while back I've been following through with Angular, right? Use a framework really, not that it's a software tool itself, but the documentation is available for free, right? So there's design documentations here, right? If you poke around in the design documents, you'll be able to find specific details associated with the design of Angular itself. Now Angular is it's just a framework really, but I hope that let's see if we can find something that can be used as an exemplar or something to try and put across what we hopefully implemented. Anyways, but I'm just trying to say here that these, especially for open source software, you should be able to. There isn't really anything that is easy to understand here that can be used as an example, but that's fine. That's fine. All right. So post conditions, right? And then the normal flow will just spell out the sequence of events. In the event that these post conditions are all true, so in this case, the student has a valid account, the postgraduate student is logged onto the system, what we're saying is the normal flow of events is spelled out here. This is what is going to happen, right? So remember the initiation is the initiation is done by the primary actor, who in this case is the postgraduate student. So we're saying as a first step, what happens, postgraduate student will select the upload digital object option, right? So this is one. And then what happens next, the system will respond by presenting this postgraduate student with a form, right? A form that will enable the student, in this case, to just maybe type in the metadata and upload the file. Third step, the postgraduate student will enter the metadata, right? We went ahead of ourselves, and then upload the bitstream itself, the PDF document. And then the system will respond by confirming that the ingestion was successful, right? And then what happens, step number 5, the system will present the user with a page, showcasing a summary page of what the student has actually keyed in, right? So the file that has been uploaded and the metadata that has been specified in the form itself. And then in step number 6, the postgraduate student will confirm to say these details are correct, submit or something. And then as the final step, the system will just present a message to the logged on user to say this deposit was successful, right? And then done, right? So the thing here, right? The sequence of events is dependent on the type of system that you're developing. It could be completely different from what I'm showcasing here. But the key thing here is that you notice that we are specifying the interaction that's happening between the user and the system, step by step. And pause for a second here and think about this, right? You must think about this. If I give you this use case diagram, you know exactly how to go about implementing this software by just going through this flow of events, right? Because you know that a user is supposed to be presented with a form, and depending on what happens here, the system is supposed to react or I guess respond in a certain way. Right? Now, if I can context switch to the other example that I was looking at, if you look at the main flow here, right? These guys are saying for this particular use case where they're calling this use case narrative, not description, it's one and the same thing here. They're saying main flow of this particular use case approved submission is the manager selects a batch from the list of pending approval batches. The manager inspects the batch to ensure no errors or omissions are present. The manager approves the batch for submission. And then once the manager approves the batch for submission, the system submits the batch file to the DSpace REST API. The system passes the results returned from DSpace. The system returns the submission successful status message. The batch file is moved out of the holding area. And then the batch submission status is updated and approved. Now again, just trying to highlight the fact that the flow, sequence of events is contextual. It depends on the type of system that you're implementing. Even more important is we're not saying that the interaction should be user, system, user, system. It's contextual. It can be user, and then system, right? This is in fact what's happening with this other example. manager who is a user, manager, user, manager, user, and then you have system, system, system. This is still system, this is still system. In certain instances, the interaction will be interchanged, right? So user system, user system, user system. If we can perhaps try and get a little bit ahead of ourselves here, you actually notice that some of these things here perhaps related to what we introduced as being, I don't know if people remember the behavioral model that we said would focus on, right? Do you remember that? What model was that? Which model could be used to represent this sort of interaction here? I don't know if you're pretending like you can't listen to me. I know you can listen to me, but hey, I don't know. But you're not reading, are you? Very sad.
I'm actually surprised that I've forgotten and disappointed. Oh,
yeah. It's a sequence diagram, right? It's a sequence diagram. If you remember our discussion of the sequence diagram, we said that you have objects, you have actors, and then I don't know if it was 7 or something. You have objects, you have you must remember these things. These things are connected. Right? You have objects, you have actors, and in fact, what you have is a situation where the key thing, a hallmark of a sequence diagram is that it models what? It provides you with a timeline, right? The timeline is represented top down, right? So what we're saying is that everything that's happening here is occurring within a certain space of time. So in fact, this thing we're calling normal flow here, you will notice it's coming back. I think our discussion after class diagrams is going to be sequence diagrams, and you'll see exactly how you can easily translate these things here, right, into a sequence diagram. And this is important because this is a more detailed, this is a slightly lower level of abstraction of what we're looking at here. Why? Because at this stage, you are specifying the actual objects that are going to be involved in the interaction itself. Observe, here, what we are saying is we're just saying, oh, student, system responds. But which part of the system is responding here? Like if you've taken an object-oriented approach, you're saying which object is going to be responsible for this, right? This is where this becomes important. And you'll be able to see exactly how we go about modeling or specifying the actual actions and when they occur. So this would be a sequence of events. This is event number 1. This is number 2, right? This would be number 3. This would be number 4. This would be number 5. And 5 looks like an S, but who cares? And this is number 6, right? So anyways, so instead of you just saying system, in here you're being more explicit, right? To say these are the actual options. And really, if you're a programmer, right, a professional programmer would probably be able to quickly translate this into fully functional code than this. Although it's possible, if you just give the programmer this, they should be able to implement this sort of interaction that you have here. But of course, it's a lot easier if you give them this, because they'll know to say, oh, well, my code is supposed to have an order class or something. It's supposed to have a budget class, right? This is an object, obviously, right? It's supposed to have an orders interface, right? You remember what Pierre at Mr. Mbewe taught us about how you represent interfaces when you're coming up with these class diagrams. We're going to do a revision very, very soon, but I just thought I'd throw it out there here, right? Okay, so the other parts that you have is what we call the alternative flow, right? So the alternative flow, as the name suggests, is what if things go wrong? Allah, what if this precondition is not true? How should the system behave, right? This is where you have the alternative flow, right? And so in this particular example, we just have one example of an alternative flow. I mean, you could have countless possibilities here. So we're saying alternative flow when a student forgets to upload the PDF bitstream. What we're saying is we expect the system to return to the form that the user was using to key in the metadata elements, for instance, and supply the file name, and prompt the user to actually upload the file. Perhaps provide the user with a descriptive message to say the file is missing, please upload file or something. Alternative flow. Key thing here is alternative flow is associated with a situation where one of the preconditions is not true. How does the system behave? Yeah. And then in terms of exceptions, to a certain extent, maybe similar to alternative flow, but we are saying here is potential things that can go wrong, right? So let's say the file that has been uploaded by the user is not a PDF file, but the system expects a PDF file. And then you specify exactly how the system is going to behave. Now, pause for a little while, and I want to, again, context switch to that other example use case. You notice that they don't have exceptions here, they just have alternative flows. It's the same thing, right? You can choose to be more detailed and provide those exceptions if you want, or you can just lump everything into alternative flow. But of course, in our case, we're using this template which has it has exceptions, right? So we must include it there. Is this making sense?
Yes, it is.
Okay. That doesn't that response doesn't sound reassuring. And then the includes would be like if you have any sub-processes, if you have any processes or other use cases that are associated with this use case, right? This is associated with those includes that we had talked about earlier. So you put it here if it's there. And then you include things like the priority associated with this use case. And this is very important, right? Because remember, this thing, if you're a business analyst that is coming up with an SRS document that will incorporate use case diagrams and use case descriptions or use case narratives, as they are called in other circles, you want the developer to be able to know to say the relative priority associated with this use case is maybe low, high, or medium. Why is this important? You want them to know what should be prioritized first, what should be done first, right? So you just state how important it is. And this raises important questions. By just looking at this, if I were you, I mean, there are trivial things like maybe the login might not, it is important, but maybe it might not be extremely important. Maybe you want to prioritize implementing the more important functionalities that are crucial to what the system is supposed to be doing. Anyway, and then in the event that you did come up with, if you've identified certain business rules associated with the system, this is really linked to business rules of the organization you're implementing the system for, you include cross-references to those business rules, right? And then if there are any other special requirements associated with this use case, of course, any sort of assumptions that you are making associated with that use case. And then finally, if there are any issues or comments or notes associated with the use case itself, this is where they go, right? But really the more important things here are things really associated with preconditions, triggers, post conditions, normal sequence of events or normal flow, alternative flow. Yeah, and just see, I was hoping we could immediately transition into class diagrams here, but it appears we won't. We'll probably do this tomorrow. But I just wanted to pause and find out if people have any specific questions with regards to what we just discussed here, and really just use case descriptions. We expect to see these use case descriptions for all the use cases associated with your system in your SRS document. The moment we're done with this lecture series, the next assignment is going to require that you have a complete SRS document, right? And the complete SRS document implies you shall have a comprehensive set of use case diagrams, use case descriptions, the context diagram associated with the respective systems or projects that you're working on. Are there any questions or concerns, comments, suggestions, complaints? Nothing.
I just didn't get you clearly on the part of the includes, that section of the includes. I didn't get what you include.
Well, so the includes would be, so remember we briefly discussed this idea of extend keywords and the include keywords, right? So if you have a situation where, observe, this is a classic example actually we have saved here because they remind us to do this, right? Look at this. We are saying for this exemplar that I have here, we are saying that the upload bitstream use case, we are modeling this upload bitstream as a separate use case, or create metadata as a separate use case. But we are saying that this is included within the ingest digital object, right? So in fact, what we should have done here is to say the ingest digital object use case includes what? It includes the upload bitstream and the create metadata use case, right? Because these are a part of this parent or this main use case here. For this to be successfully worked towards, it's dependent on these sub processes here. It's like, and again, I guess maybe the example that I'm using, because I'm latching onto the example that I said would come up over and over again, is like if you had, don't do this please, but if you had use case. If you had, so you have a user, right? And then you have a use case, let's say, I'm trying to think here. Create, and I'm just making things up, create or register account, right? Yeah. What you could, if you think about this for a second, you realize that the registration process of an account involves so many different things. So if you want to be detailed, and nobody does this though, but if you wanted to be detailed, you'd say create password, right? Now, if you think about it, creating a password, when you're registering an account, you create a password, you probably create username. This is what you do, right? We do this all the time. Is that not what you do? I don't know. This is what I do myself, but maybe you don't do this. So you create username and then you create password. What we're saying is that this includes these two things here, right? So in fact, what we would do here is just say this we'll just change this to follow the convention. We'll just change this to the type of arrow to, come on, to this dotted line, right? To follow convention, dotted line. Oh, wow. And I guess this should have been placed somewhere here to make it more visually appealing, I guess. Oh, come on. Sometimes I hate it when this thing behaves like, oh, beautiful. So we'd say this, and then what we say here is we'd say double chevron and just say include, right? Again, here we have the double chevron, and then we say include or something. So this is what we mean, right? So if you representing, oh, also we have this here, right? So, I mean, so this doesn't look nice. That's much better. So still much better. So what we're saying is that when we're creating a use case description for the register account, we'll include these create username and create password. Does this make sense?
Yes, it does.
All right, so listen, I'm looking at the time. I have another class and I need to quickly transition. I'll see you tomorrow at, I don't know what time we meet tomorrow, but tomorrow is 18 hours promptly. Goodbye, I'll share the video as soon as it renders. Thanks, cheers.